as I'm saying all this and I'm saying, well, we don't have to worry about those feathers or anything, we have some right here that we are gonna have to pull. So I opened my big mouth and said a bunch of stuff, and then now I can put my foot right back in it because we do have to process a few. Hello everyone. We are now at week 7 of the 52 Sunday Dinners project. If this is your first time joining us, hello, my name is Ashley. I'm a registered dietitian and I love everything vintage and food. That's led me here to this. This is the 52 Sunday Dinners project. If you'd like to know a little bit more about what the whole purpose of this project is, what we're trying to do and accomplish, you can go ahead and refer back to the first Sunday dinner, and I give a little bit more of an in-depth explanation about what we're trying to do here. Today on the menu, we have rice and tomato soup as our starter. For our main course, we're having a roast chicken with creamed carrots, baked potatoes, brown gravy. For our salad course, we'll have a tomato aspic salad. And then for dessert, we have pineapple cake and prune cake. And then, of course, we're having coffee. Some of these recipes seem very interesting, so why don't you go ahead and join me in the kitchen and we'll get started on them. We're cutting this recipe in half, and history of past episodes has shown that me working with sugar is not always, I guess, the most positive result. So we're gonna hope that this time it turns out a little better. And we're not cooking sugar directly to, I think, a certain point. We're just doing sugar and water. We're just trying to make a simple syrup. I make that at home all the time successfully. So I think this one will be a little bit better than maybe some of the other ones that we've done. We made grape ice before, but I don't believe it had the egg whites in it. So I'm interested to see what a difference the egg whites will make in the texture of this. Yeah, it's not something I think I've seen in a frozen dessert like that before, or if I have, I don't recall it. We'll get this in the freezer. I'll check on it in maybe about a half an hour and see if it is half frozen, and then we'll go ahead and get our egg whites put in. It's not half frozen. It seemed like it was much more frozen, I think, at the top initially, and now that I'm mixing everything in, it's certainly a lot less frozen than I expected. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more frozen for those egg whites to not float back up to the top. But looking at it here, you see it really just wants to sit right up at the top. I'm going to put this back in the freezer, all of this together, and I will go back down maybe once or twice and try and incorporate it in a little bit more once it's more frozen. And hopefully we will have a more incorporated kind of lighter, fluffier pineapple ice and not a layered dessert of pineapple ice on the bottom and egg whites on the top. For the creamed carrots, there is no recipe. It says here for us to see page 33 after the baked potatoes and the carrots, but there's only a recipe for the carrots. I'm just going to use kind of the same idea and recipe for the creamed peas and creamed corn, all of the other creamed vegetables that we've had so far. I'm going to dice and boil the carrots, and once they're tender, drain them and make a cream sauce to pour over them. I'm using gluten-free flour for this, but as we've discussed before, it probably isn't going to thicken this recipe up or thicken this cream sauce, but I do want, I think, kind of just the flavor of the flour in there. So we will go through this whole process or these steps for the cream sauce, and then afterward, if we want it to be a little thicker, if it's not thick enough, we'll add a little bit of cornstarch to it to thicken it. I like the narrative of this rice and tomato soup ahead of time. For economy's sake, it is always well to have a soup precede a poultry dinner. Then less of the chicken or duck, whichever it is, will be eaten, leaving sufficient for a serving on the second day. I find it interesting that they're comparing the price of chicken and duck as the more expensive meat. And if you've priced ducks anytime recently, you'll know that chicken is much more economical than duck is currently. And also, chicken is much more economical than really any other meat that's out there. You look at beef, you look at lamb, fish, really anything else, pork, chicken typically is the least expensive. So having them point out wanting a soup to stretch the chicken further, I think is just kind of a funny thing for 100 years later, how different it is now. We made the puree last night, and so I'm bringing it up to heat. As we mentioned with the carrots, I don't think that the flour is going to thicken this because we are choosing to make this a gluten-free meal today. And so I do have the cornstarch that I had measured out to use in the carrots already, I have left over, and I'm going to use it in the soup instead. We have moved on to the tomato aspic salad, which I think is something that is maybe villainized, made fun of a lot. It's one of those weird Jell-O salads that you see advertised and you see people making fun of a lot. And I think we associate Jell-O now with sweet things. We're not used to them being savory. Looking at this recipe, my initial feeling is not one of, I think, excitement for tasting it. I think excitement for trying it and trying it on video, just because it's so different than what we're used to, but it's not like oh, I can't wait to taste this. However, ironically, as I am making this, as we're filming this a day or two ago, one of you posted almost this exact same recipe in the Facebook group. And I had been looking at it before, and maybe the day before you posted it, and was like, I'm going to be making this. I wonder what this is going to turn out like. Does anybody still eat stuff like this? Is this something that people still are familiar with? Does anybody have positive memories of this? And then the exact one got posted, and then I was telling Nani about it, and she was saying, oh, I love an aspic salad, and I used to make them all the time with savory ingredients and fish and things like that, I believe she said. So, and I know at church dinners I've had them, although I think it's been lime Jell-O with vegetables inside. So obviously there are still positive associations for people with these recipes. All right, so I'm taking a combination of everybody's suggestions. I've had the suggestion to do these in smaller, like individual size containers, so we're gonna start there. Then in order to make the gelatin molds come out a little bit easier, I have heard to grease them. I've heard to brush them with Jell-O. I've heard to put plastic wrap in them. And I've heard to leave it, just pour it into a mold and kind of pry it around the sides with a knife, and to dip it in warm water. Now we've tried a combination of the warm water and the prying around the sides. However, after prying around the edges, I left it in the warm water too long, and it came out already a little bit liquefied. So we are going to, I think, try one in water separate from the edges, if we have enough here, I suppose. I think we'll have enough for 5 molds to test all these theories, but I'm not very good at spatial reasoning, so maybe we only need 2 molds. I don't know. We're going to find out. When we've had things with prunes in them in the past, we've run it through a sieve to make sort of a prune puree. And for this, it doesn't say to do anything like that. It just says to have 2 cups which have been cooked very soft and the seeds removed. So I assume that we're supposed to cook this down until it is very, very soft and can be, it says stirred in. I don't know if we're supposed to stir it or beat it. I think I'll use the mixer to incorporate it a little more thoroughly. For the prune cake, we are going to use gluten-free flour. We're using the King Arthur 1-to-1 ratio flour. The general consensus is that for baking cakes and different things like that, this is the best flour to use. It seems to be the most consistent and I guess the most dummy proof. We're gonna go ahead and use that for this cake because everything we've had with prunes so far has been so delicious and I do not want to miss out on this cake. Maybe if we have a different type of cake that I'm not exceptionally excited to try myself, in the future I'll use regular flour and let other people try it, but for some of these, like this prune cake that I'm really looking forward to, we're gonna go ahead and do it in a way that I can try it because, yeah, I just love prunes and I really want to try this. Now, this says to bake in 4 layers. I have 2 cake pans here because I was planning on baking it in 2 layers and cutting it in half. We'll see how much this fills up and how much batter we have left over. And if it seems like we still have a ton of batter, I will bake it into 4 different cakes. But just in case, I think my initial plan is just to fill 2 of these and cut it in half. So I let these cool overnight instead of waiting until, I guess, several hours and pulling them out. But something that I think is really cool, and I don't know if these are in modern cake pans or not, but the cake pan that I used here, a good bit of the cake was left over in the bottom, and maybe that's because I let it cool too long. I should have taken it out earlier, but the cake pan that has this little sliding loosener cutter, whatever this is, in the bottom, there wasn't a lot left over, and if you look at the bottom of the cakes, it looks like the cake that was in this pan, it seems like there you can kind of see the layers missing, where the cake where we use the other pan is a lot more intact. Now, neither one of them are bad. They look like they're pretty intact, both of them in general, but if I had to pick which one of these I wanted to use for the future, if I only had the choice of one, I'd probably pick the one with that little slider. Let's get these bad boys cut in half, and then we're going to make the icing and get them all stuck together. If you watched at the very beginning, maybe around, I think we started at week 31. So in the first few weeks, 31, 32, 33, maybe even 34, we made a cake that was supposed to be in several layers, and they were supposed to be thin layers, but modern cakes today that I've seen, the layers are usually as thick or maybe thicker than this one cake here, and so I didn't even consider slicing the layers in half or the cake in half to make 2 layers from one cake. And so I think the cake only had 1 or 2 layers, and this is pretty awesome. It's kind of this is kind of an efficient way to do a layer cake. I love it because I'm only baking 2 layers, but I come out with 4. That's pretty awesome. Half the number of dishes to do. This is great. I love this. We put in the correct amount of heavy cream, thick cream, and the icing is pretty thick still. I don't know, it's rather dry, so I'm going to put in maybe a half of a tablespoon here, a teaspoon and a half, and hopefully that will thin it out enough so that it is spreadable. Getting there. Looking at the amount that's in here and how many layers we have, I think we're going to need to double this recipe at least. So I'll make enough of this, or I'll use what we have, and maybe this will at least stick the layers of the cake together, but I think that we're going to need at least one more recipe of this to cover the cake on the outside. I'm going to put a little bit of the icing here on the bottom just so that I can get this layer to stick and it doesn't go flying everywhere. By George, I think it worked. There is no way I've used, I'd say at least 3/4 of the icing already between these two layers, and maybe I need to be using less, but it doesn't seem like there's even that much in between the layers here, and maybe that's a 2024 American perspective of cake, and we don't need that much in this recipe or how they intended it. Maybe they just intended a little bit in between layers, not huge thick amounts like I suppose we are used to, but we're definitely, I think I'm gonna make probably at least 2 more, or make the next amount so it'll have double the yield of what this does. I'll double it. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm going to double the next recipe. I have a gluten-free loaf of bread, and I forget the brand that I bought this time, but it's not too shabby. I've tried it with a little bit of toast, and I can't really, I think you can kind of tell, but if I didn't know that it was gluten-free, I don't think I would realize that it was. Also, this recipe calls for savory. Some of the recipes that we have done in the past, I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I've gone all sorts of places looking for it, and I just can't seem to find it. And I hadn't grown it on my own, so I didn't have any. But Tori bought me, she found some at a Mennonite store, this bulk store near where she lives. And so we're gonna go ahead and powder it up a little and sift it into this recipe. So that's pretty exciting. It says you can add minced onion if you'd like, and I have dried onion here. I do have regular onion, but I know that I won't use, if I only do a couple tablespoons, I'm not going to use the rest of it before it goes bad, and so I'm just going to use a little bit of this dried onion instead, and I'll just add a little extra liquid, maybe like a half a tablespoon of liquid more into this to make up for that. It does smell like several other herbs, and I think because we didn't have the savory before, and if we didn't have it this time, we could have used some oregano or rosemary or something instead. That smells like Thanksgiving. I don't know if I have mentioned before, but I have had experience, and I think probably just one experience if I remember correctly, in processing chickens. And I'm very grateful for that experience. And if I was offered the opportunity to help our friends again to process their chickens, I would jump at that opportunity. On the other side of that though, I'm also very grateful that we live in the time that we live now, and some conveniences are allowed in that time. And one of them being, we don't have to wash this chicken. We don't have to pull any pin feathers. It's all been done for us. So we get to skip over that step, which is, I think, both a good and a bad thing. We kind of have to, in accepting the convenience of our food at this point, we're doing it at the cost sometimes of our health and the quality of our food. It's a delicate balance in the world that we live in today. Do you take the processed food and it's much more convenient and easier, and sometimes we don't have the time to do all of this type of cooking, and even some of this type of cooking is full of processed food as well, but do we take that, or do we do the whole kind of doing all of it ourselves and getting only homegrown local produce, and the cost and timing of that? It's a balance, and you have to give up one for the other often. So you have to pick and choose, and I guess some of that choice is being able to, I think, try to make some baby steps in improving the way that you eat and the things that you're consuming, putting in your body, putting in your home. If that's something that you're concerned about, you don't have to go 100% all in. You can start making different small choices and be, I guess, happy and secure in knowing that the choices that you're making are moving you toward a healthier, more sustainable lifestyle. This gravy recipe is the same gravy recipe that we used last week, and this time it's just for the chicken instead of the pork, but I believe it's the same recipe. It says brown gravy, and last week's was also brown gravy. And so we're gonna do a similar method here, I think, at least if I remember what we did last week correctly. I'm going to start it off with the flour, the gluten-free flour. Then we will add the drippings, or some of the drippings that have been drained. And then if it still needs thickened, we will add our cornstarch. I think I forgot to film the actual putting in of the cornstarch, but it is in there, and it was not thickening up without the cornstarch, but now that the cornstarch is in there, it is thickening up. So I think that was the right move. Time to determine which of our methods worked. And we made these yesterday, and so by this point, I can't remember what method we used for any of these, except I know that we used the plastic wrap for this one, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, one of these was greased, one of them I put Jello, like the gelatin, around and brushed that with the gelatin. I think I remember that, but maybe I'm wrong. And one of these we put in without anything, and I don't remember what we did to the other one. So I guess I'll remember when I edit this. When I go back, I'll know which one was which. But as you're watching it, you might remember, because for you it was probably just like 10 seconds ago, but for me it's been more than 24 hours. So, well, I can already tell you this isn't sliding right out. Try this one. Nope. No. And no. This one, I think, is going to slide right out. Oh, yep, immediately. But now we have to get the plastic wrap off. Okay, so that method kind of worked. It wasn't too terrible. Now it leaves, at least the way I did it, I might not have done it correctly with the plastic wrap method. For the way I did it, you can tell I had, I guess, some extras left over in the mold of the plastic wrap. It wasn't firmly all the way around, and maybe you're supposed to trim it before you do that, but that's not terrible. Now we're going to try the slip of the knife around and see if that works for any of these. Okay. All right, well, the knife slip around isn't working. We'll try and go a little deeper. Maybe I didn't get quite deep enough. I'm just kind of, as I'm slipping it, I'm also wiggling a little bit. If this method does work, I have a feeling it's going to mess up, like I'm cutting into the actual mold or the design of the mold on this. Okay, and yes, I think that's correct. All of the little scallops on the side kind of got shaved off as I put the knife around it. No, not gonna work. Do a bigger plate for this one. So it's not quite working for this one either. lobster. Okay, it didn't work with the lobster either, so I think we're now looking at probably doing the hot water, at least a little dunk in the hot water for all of these. I'll start with the little one here. I have some hot water in there. 3, 2, 1. Okay, not quite enough. 5 more seconds. Hey, there we go. That looks kind of perfect. So I think I had it in there maybe 5 seconds the first time, maybe 7 seconds the second time. 3, 2, 1, and I accidentally got a little water in there. I hope that's not a problem. All right, there we go. Maybe a little too long in there, but you get the concept. Come on out of there. Beautiful, look at that. Fantastic. So what I will say is when comparing these methods, not the hot water method, and this is the hot water, this is the hot water maybe a little too long, and this is the hot water. The resulting texture on the outside is more glossy, shiny, detail-oriented with the hot water method. Probably because that gelatin has a chance to maybe melt and shine up a little bit, where with these methods, it still looks good. I guess in the context of these Jell-O salads looking good, but it still looks like sort of what it's supposed to look like. It's just that it's not as glossy or detailed compared to the other ones. I think it's important to keep in mind and note though that if you leave it in too long, like the lobster compared to the fish, it seems I did this one a good bit longer and I accidentally got a little bit of that water in there. You can see the difference, and maybe that's the only difference. Maybe the difference is the grease versus the gelatin. I'm not sure, but I think I still like the hot water method best. Right. Now for the step you know I don't want to take, but you know we have to, and it's the mayonnaise step. So we're going to garnish this with a little mayonnaise, and there's a perfect little hole right here. It looks to be a nice receptacle to hold this mayo, and then garnish with a few olives. And it didn't say to slice them. I assume it's supposed to be whole. So there we are. It's time to try everything, and this week we are coming back with the soup starters, and for this starter we have a tomato rice soup. And this one was a multi-step process and took 2 days to do. We made the puree the day before, and we combined the rice and mixed everything and thickened it today. So we're gonna start with that here. You can see it looks thick, but not too thick. You can see the rice texture, or the texture of the rice in there. It smells very good. It smells like tomato. Let's give it a try. That's great. It reminds me of the inside of a stuffed pepper or something like that. The rice, the tomato sauce, or stuffed cabbage. If I kind of want to add a little bit of ground beef or something like that inside of it and make it an entire meal like this. This is delicious, and I think when the recipe said to serve chicken with something like a soup to start, so it stretches the meal and people don't eat as much of the chicken, adding the rice to this is a very economical idea, filling up your belly first before you get to the meat. And I mean, I could probably eat this alone and maybe with a little bit of meat in here, but this with a little bit of protein, I would be happy with having this as the meal. Now, my off-camera help tried it, and they felt that it was missing something. They felt it was very acidic, which makes sense because it is a tomato soup, but the acid notes came forward a little more than maybe what they prefer. Now, maybe that's why I liked it, because acid is, I think, one of my favorite flavor notes. Flavor note, I don't know if that's the right word to call it, but I like my foods very acidic. I like vinegar on everything. I like lemon juice. I prefer acidic flavors. Now, they felt there was just something, they agreed that they would like it with some meat or something else. They just felt that there was something in there that was unbalanced. On to the main course, we have our chicken. We have the stuffing that was inside of the chicken. We have our carrots. We're supposed to have that baked potato. We've had that potato before. We've tried the recipe. It's worked out well. I didn't make it this time. I had planned on making it, but I looked at all the food that we had, and knowing that I won't be able to eat it, any leftovers starting tomorrow, there'll be no one in my house to eat it. I'll bring leftovers to other people, but I don't think they're going to want to eat a baked potato that I have already eaten off of. So I chose to omit it from this meal, but I'll consider it when we talk about the general overall meal and the cost and the nutrition. But let's take a look at what we have here. We have our chicken, our stuffing, and our creamed carrots. The skin on the top half, I didn't put this chicken on a roaster, and I should have done that because the breast side, where it says to bake it breast side down, the breast side skin is kind of soggy and wet still instead of crisping up nicely. I should have put that on a little roasting rack to keep it up off of that, and I'll remember that for next time. Now, I am not trying the breast. I'm trying some of the dark meat off of the top of the leg there, off of the thigh. It smells really good. It smells very, I think you can smell the savory in it. You smell the skin and the chicken and the herbs. It smells very comforting. I think that's very good. I didn't get any of the skin in there. I just got the chicken and the gravy. But overall, the flavor of that, it's juicy. I think it's roasted correctly to the correct temperature, the correct time. The flavor is really good. Let's try some of that stuffing. It's the same thing. It smells like comfort, like Thanksgiving. We had about a foot of snow before. It has all melted, and then halfway through the day today, it started snowing again. I think we were only supposed to get a half an inch here, and we've certainly gotten more than that at this point. But this kind of seems like a nice, comforting part of the meal. Stuffing, roasted chicken. If we would have had those potatoes, these creamed carrots, and we started with a warm soup. It's a very comforting snow day type of menu. That stuffing and dressing, I think, is delicious. The texture is mushy. So if you are if Tori was here, she would hate this because the texture is very dense. It's like a bread pudding if you didn't let the top of the bread pudding crisp up. It's very dense, very moist, very squishy, and that's something that I really like. So if that's a texture you like, I think you would love this. If you find that very off-putting and you prefer to have like the hard edges crispy outside of the bird type of stuffing, that would probably be a much better option for you, but I think this is fantastic. Now let's try these carrots. I like in the sauce how, let me see if you can see it here. The carrots have kind of dyed the sauce a very light orange. I don't know if it's coming up on camera or if it looks just white to you, but there is a very subtle orange color to the sauce in here, which is very fun. I think my brain is associating it with like an orange icing and a citrus flavor, and I know that's not what this is going to taste like, but my brain has this expectation that it's going to be kind of sweet and citrusy. Nope, it smells just like carrots. I love carrots. This is really good. I think with that acidic first course, and then the savory dressing chicken, if we would have had that baked potato there, having kind of more of a sweet vegetable here with these carrots, it's a very nice balance. My off-camera taste tester had the breast. They prefer white meat over dark meat, so they had the breast. They said that the flavor was very good. In fact, they used the word, there's a robust herb flavor, which I like that word. That's a great way to describe it. However, they prefer a crispier skin, and I think they like their texture a little bit more dry, similar to how Tori has described she likes hers. They prefer the meat to be a little bit more dry. They liked the flavor of the stuffing. They're not generally a big fan of the stuffing, but they thought the flavor was good for what it was. They just prefer to skip over stuffing usually. And they skipped over the carrots this time. I think they're trying to save room for some other things. Now it's time for our salad course, and this is an interesting one. We have our tomato aspic salad out of the mold with mayo on top and garnished with the olives. Now, when I think of this, I don't put this in a category of positivity or being appetizing, anything like that. But as I mentioned before, there are some of you that still make these types of things regularly and really enjoy them. So I'm trying to keep an open mind. I like all the ingredients that went in here. It's just not the way that I would normally eat it. So while my eyes are looking at this, my brain is processing almost a little bit of like revulsion, a little bit. And it feels like I'm not going to like this, but I'm trying to override my brain on that. I'm trying to override that initial reaction and anticipate that this is going to be very good. So let's find out. Now mine seems to be a lot more matte, like more opaque than the ones that I have seen before, and the one of you shared in the Facebook group, your family's recipe, and yours looked much more translucent, transparent even than what mine does, and I'm curious about what the reason for that is. The smell that I'm getting off of this I don't smell any of the ingredients, I don't think. I have an association of what this smells like, and it's none of these things. I don't smell the olives that I thought I would. I don't smell the tomato that I thought I would. The smell it reminds me of, I don't want to say it, but I want to be honest with you. If you've ever opened up those dog treats, like the bacon strips or some of those treats like that for dogs, that's kind of what this smells like, which isn't helping my brain to override the fact that I'm not sure that this is going to be very good. at least in my opinion. But that's what we're looking at here. All right, let's give it a try. It's not as bad as I expected it to be, but it's not good either. I think I don't like the celery in here. Let me try it again with the mayonnaise. Well, folks, I never thought that I would say this ever in my whole life, but I think this tastes better with mayonnaise. There's something about it that the mayonnaise balances it out better. It's still not something I'm used to, and I would be excited and looking forward to eating at this point. However, with the mayonnaise in it, it's not unpleasant. I can't say that I would ever choose to make this again, but I think if I ate this several times, like that second bite, I had a second bite with the mayonnaise, and the second bite I liked more than the first two bites. And I could see myself eating this again if someone served it to me with the mayonnaise, which is, I don't even know who I am. Who is this person saying that? But if you serve this to me with the mayonnaise, I might not dislike it, I think. I don't know. Give it a try and tell me what you think. My off-camera help, when they saw the salad, they thought it looked kind of disgusting. And they tried it, they smelled it, they disagreed with me that it smelled like dog treats. They didn't think that. They tried it and they said it was a kind of an overpowering flavor. They could tell there was some acidity, but it was a kind of a battle between tasting the olives and tasting the celery. And the olives had just a little bit of a larger margin, and they won over in the flavor column. They did not like the texture at all, and they said the taste wasn't awful, it wasn't great, it just it kind of was. They wouldn't eat it again if given the choice. And the mayonnaise, they felt there wasn't really a difference for them in the flavor of having it with the mayonnaise versus without the mayonnaise. And now is for my favorite part of the meal, which is dessert. And in this menu, it shows pineapple ice here, prune cake here. And when they have different options like that, or it's on the same line and next to each other, for some of these, I think you're supposed to choose one. You could have either pineapple ice or prune cake. I don't know that it was meant for us to have both. However, we made both and we're going to try both. I started scooping this and realized that I hadn't shown you how it ended up after we'd put it in the freezer and tried to mix in a couple more times. So we were able to incorporate those egg whites a little bit better after it had been a little more frozen, but I think they still kind of floated to the top there. So let's see how it turned out. So here is what it looks like scooped out. It smells good. It smells subtly like pineapple. It's not overpowering that I can tell, but I can see, I don't know if the camera is picking that up at all, I can see the delineation between the egg whites and the ice. Like you can, there, it's not fully incorporated. That's really good. I like the way it, so you put it in your mouth and it's icy and like you're eating shaved ice, but then as it starts to melt in your mouth and your mouth starts to warm that ice up and the juice kind of moves away, the egg whites kind of move away, you're left with the flesh of the pineapple, and that shredded pineapple in there comes through, and it's just a very nice transition, I guess, of textures as you work through it. Yeah, it's very pleasant. And there's a nice mix of, you can tell there's a tartness in there with the pineapple, with the lemon, but it's balanced very nicely with that simple syrup. Now I can't tell, and maybe if we had incorporated them better, the texture would be a little bit different. It feels a little bit airy and light, but not exceptionally. I'd be curious to know what this was like without the egg whites, if it would just be one solid block and it wouldn't be light enough to go through those transitions. But without being able to compare it to something else, I'm wondering how necessary the egg whites are. My taste tester agrees with me. They feel this is very well balanced, the flavors in it. They really like the texture. I think they really like everything about this. And they said it would be a really, really good summer treat. So now that we have proper refrigeration, and if we were to make this again in the summertime, it would be a really refreshing, nice dessert to have. And now that I'm thinking about it, if this would be really, really nice if you were having a celebration or something in the summer, or you were having friends over, to pour maybe a little champagne or something over top of this and have yourself a nice little pineapple champagne float or something. I think that would be a beautiful way to celebrate an afternoon or an evening in the summer around here. This cake isn't the most beautiful. However, I'm hoping that it is the most delicious. We'll see. So far, everything we've made with plums has been incredible. I really hope that this cake is no exception, but let's get it cut, and I'll cut it from this side and then show you what it looks like, what the layers look like. All right. So you can tell that there are different layers. You can see the delineation between them. That's the second time I've used that word today. It's not a word I commonly use, but I guess it's appropriate for this meal. But it smells, I can smell it coming up already after I've cut into it. It smells lovely, and it's sticking to my little server here, so I assume that it's probably very moist in texture, which would make sense because it's made from prunes. Normally, if any of you who know me in my personal life have seen me eat a cake, I am going to eat it like a normal human being. Usually I eat it in a very odd way, but I'm going to eat it regular today for all of our viewers, and then I'll eat it my normal weird way once I shut the camera off. I can certainly smell the plums in there. It actually kind of smells like molasses too, even though we didn't put any molasses in there. It smells very good. It also tastes very good. It is extremely moist. I don't know that I, again, would know that this was gluten-free, and maybe the flavor would be different if I used regular flour compared to gluten-free flour, but the texture of this is lovely. The flavor of it is wonderful. I don't think I pick out the flavor of the plums. It just tastes like just a sweet, moist cake. Now, the icing on this might be a little bit too much, a little too sweet for, I think, my preference on this. And maybe we weren't being given the option of those two icings. Maybe we were supposed to use the original, I forget what that icing was called, but the one where we cook the sugar and then put it with the egg whites. Maybe that was meant for this, and the white icing without eggs is for something else. But I'd say if you decide to try this and you try it with the original icing, let us know what you think about that, if that was too sweet or not. I think for me, if there is the amount of icing that's just between the layers, it's really good. but maybe the icing that's on the outside is just a little bit too much for this cake. So our taste tester really likes the cake. They really like the texture. They said you can tell that there is fruit in it, that it's kind of a fruit-based cake because the chew is a little bit gummier, or the texture is a little bit chewier. There's a little bit of a give to it, or a hesitation maybe in that chew, in that bite. They agree that the icing is a little bit too much, and as we were discussing, they said, well, didn't you make more icing than what it called for? And I said, well, yes, I did, because I wouldn't have been able to cover it if I hadn't made it. And they said, well, were you even supposed to cover it? And I look back and it says to cover the top. It never said to cover the sides. And so I think maybe we weren't supposed to. Now, I don't think it occurred to me, because whenever I make a cake, especially as if I make tons of cake, but when I think about cakes and layer cakes, typically there is almost always icing on the outside as well as between the layers. So I think it was just an automatic reaction. It didn't even occur to me that there wouldn't be any on the sides. And maybe with this cake, we weren't supposed to. And the sweetness in that icing was just enough to be between those layers and on the top. Our taster also felt that they were tasting something reminiscent of molasses. They didn't smell it, they tasted it. And so I'm not sure what that is, if prunes are reminiscent of molasses, but I was smelling it, they were tasting it. The flavor, if you eat cake the way that I do, and the way I eat cake is to mush it all up together, kind of like when you make cake balls or cake pops, and mix all of the icing and all of the cake together, because I think I like that mushier texture of things. And if you do it like that, if you mush the whole thing together in one, the icing and sweetness balance out a little bit better, and it's not too sweet when you do that. Overall, I really liked this menu this time. I think everything paired well together, balanced each other a little bit. There were things that maybe we aren't used to having 100 years later in 2024, like that tomato aspic salad, or even the pineapple ice that I've never heard of people making in this day and age. But everything really worked well together and made a very cohesive meal. Nutrition-wise, I also really liked this meal. I think they did a great job of balancing the economic way of stretching things out, like adding that stuffing to our chicken and adding rice to our soup, while also keeping so many different fruits and vegetables in this meal. So we started out with a tomato soup. Then we had the nice lean meat in the poultry in our chicken. And along with that chicken, along with the protein that we had, next to it were our carrots, and we also were supposed to have a potato, and we did have stuffing in there as well. After that, we had our tomato aspic salad, which had tomato, it had celery, it had olives, it had walnuts. There were a lot of really good, healthy ingredients in that. And then we finished our meal with either and, both, or one or the other. There was fruit. There was a lot of fruit, actually. We had pineapple, we had lemon juice, we had orange juice. So that was a nice dose of vitamin C that we just got. Our tomatoes have vitamin C, but we did cook them down. So some of that vitamin C would have been degraded, but in the citrus juice, it wouldn't have been. So that was a great dose of that. And then even in our cake, we have a cake, but it's full of prunes. So we have those plums as a dried fruit in there that we had rehydrated. I think it was a totally fabulous meal for that. To translate to today, if I were to make this meal again and want to make it a little more nutritious based on our normal activity levels that we have in our society today, I think really the only change I might make is if we were to have the stuffing, I would omit the potato, or if we had the potato, I would omit the stuffing. Everything else seemed to be balanced pretty well. Budget-wise, this one wasn't really a break the bank kind of meal. Our whole chicken, I think, ended up being about $8, and if this was to stretch and last maybe another meal or two by adding that soup, I think that is a fabulous way and a fabulous economical way to stretch things out with that less expensive, at least in today's day and age, that less expensive chicken combined with some of these other things. The carrots were not expensive. Our potatoes are notoriously inexpensive, and our stuffing was pretty expensive because we used I think it was like a $9 loaf of gluten-free bread, but you could either make your own bread or you could buy a relatively inexpensive loaf. For this meal, for 6 people, we're looking at somewhere between $50 and $75. And I think in a lot of the meals, the $75 is kind of the starting point and it goes up from there. With this one, I think we're somewhere in between the $50 to $75. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked what you saw, please consider liking and subscribing. That way you never miss one of our Sunday dinners. Please join us next week where our main course is a stuffed pork chop with fried apples and we attempt to make a cocoa whipped cream dessert. See you then. I love this dress, but one of my favorite features of it is that the wrists are very elastic. So if I am about to put my hands into a chicken and I don't want to get it all over my sleeves in a long sleeve dress, I can take the elastic and just pull it all the way back, and now my sleeves look like this and are safe. So, pretty cool feature.